Again, for those of you who've come in a little late, this is Andrea Faulkner. I am the Assistant Director in the Office for Exceptional Children, and I oversee the urban support team within that office. I'm also the chair of the One Needs Assessment Committee. So today we are going to go over the One Needs Assessment as it relates to ESCs and DDs, completing it for your own entity, so your own organizations. So, Andy, yes, we can get this PowerPoint to you when we are finished up today. We'll most likely send it out to the same emails that we sent the original invitations to. And for those who may be wondering, this was sent to superintendent and treasurers identified within OEDs. So we will get that out to you. We also are recording this so that it can be shared with you. So if you need to go back and look at something, or you remembered something but can't quite remember it, you can go back and take a look. So the One Needs Assessment actually came out of a much larger project called EdSteps. EdSteps is taking multiple parts of the agency and kind of connecting things together. So you'll see that the One Needs Assessment, many of you have been doing multiple needs assessment based on different funding. So because you receive a consolidated application, you've been doing a needs assessment within the consolidated application. But some of you also receive grant funding. So then you have to do another needs assessment for your grant funding. So the hope and plan of EdSteps is to eliminate the needs for multiple needs assessments and multiple plans. So the hope is that we end up with one needs assessment, and that we call right now is called the One Needs Assessment. We are not quite there yet. We are not completely fully implementing EdSteps, but we are trying to move closer and closer each year to having truly one consolidated application, which includes a consolidated needs assessment. You'll also see that we want to have one plan. You have a CCIP plan for your consolidated funds, but again, as we add more layers of funding, you also end up with multiple plans for improvement as well. So we want to end up with one needs assessment that builds one plan. We want it to be a multi-year process. We all know, all the research shows it takes time to implement practices and procedures. So when we're thinking about how we do planning right now, it's a new plan every year. Most of you don't go and write a new plan every year. You roll over the previous year's plan, sometimes checking to see if it's still applicable, sometimes just kind of letting it ride. So what we're doing instead is giving it an intentional multi-year process so that every 3 years, you're going in and doing a new needs assessment and a new plan. And as part of that, you're going back in and looking at those. But you're able to make changes at any point in time in that 3 years. So if something changes, you're able to go in and make some changes. So the other pieces of the EdSteps line that you see here gets into the rest of the project, which is a consolidated grant application. So instead of writing a grant in which you submit some of the same information across grants, you would be able to submit one grant application, probably much larger, but be able to do that and submit it then for all grants. So it's a little bit easier on that process. Then it is connecting it to the funding applications. So while we'll do a 3-year plan, you'll do a yearly funding application still. And then ultimately it connects back to monitoring. So this is EdSteps in a kind of a nutshell. And the first piece of the work that we rolled out was the One Needs Assessment. Okay, so the One Needs Assessment, we were very strategic when we built this out. And for many of you, you'll know that we rolled out the One Needs Assessment for school districts and community schools last year. We did not roll out to ESCs and DDs last year. We did not feel we had the quality product that would need to be used, and we allowed ESCs and DDs to stay within the previous piece. But the whole purpose of having this one needs assessment, as it has now been built, is so that it is data driven, that it is focused on a few high impact items, and that it builds a plan within your CCIP. So ultimately, you have a comprehensive needs assessment. You're going to see that there are some differences between the needs assessment for school districts and the needs assessments for ESCs and DDs. And this is partially why we had this separate training for you. And one of those pieces is that data-driven component. What we have noticed is that each ESC and DD have some very unique situations. You may offer supports that another ESC or DD does not, or vice versa. And so when we try to go in and build a data-driven needs assessment, we were struggling with some of the data components because we didn't have good, what we call triggers. So you'll hear a district talk about how they have triggers for their question. So their data says this question is required because of your data. So an example would be like, you're going to have to look at graduation rate for your students because your graduation rate was below 67%. We don't have that kind of data right now for ESCs and DDs. So you will see that unlike a school district or a school that has required questions, you will see that all of your questions are optional, which means you as an organization would make a decision about which questions you would want to ask and answer of yourself within the needs assessment to build your plan. And we're going to talk about what that all means and what that looks like here in just a little bit. But I'm just trying to give you some of like the context in which this is built. The other piece too is I've been telling the team that we're kind of considering this kind of like the first year, and meaning we want feedback. I'll be honest, I want feedback every year. But as you are working through your needs assessment, please, please, please reach out to the department if there are questions about the wording of a question, or if you feel there's something missing, or if you would like to have seen something different, please reach out to the department and let us know, because we are just now getting ready to start on next year's questions. And we want your feedback and we want your input. So that is that idea of that data-driven piece. Right now, we don't have the data on our end to drive that, but we are looking for some input from you guys on what data might be helpful to trigger a set of questions. Example, if you run an early childhood program, what might that data be that we want to use to help you see, hey, this is a question you really should answer because you run an early childhood program. So that is kind of where we are in the overall process. I want to show you how things are broken up a little bit. So within the needs assessment, you're going to see sections and priority needs. We have tried in all possibilities to line up the sections so that whether you're an ESC, a DD, or a school district, you would see the same 8 sections. That does not always work out very well because of some of the work that you do. But we've tried our best to align everything around these 8 sections that we have. And I've got 2 examples right here on the screen where you'll see college and career readiness, and then curriculum, instruction, and assessment. What is different is that we created subsections in some cases specifically for ESCs and DDs. What we did not want was for you guys to go in and see school district questions that were not applicable to you. So we actually created specific questions in the tool for ESCs and DDs. And so I have some examples of like this priority need area based on an ESC or a DD, so that you could see some of those examples that you'll see when you go into the One Needs assessment. Okay, so we're getting ready to go into how to get in the tool. Before I get there, I'm going to give a chance for anybody to give a question if they've got one. And then we'll start talking about the actual One Needs assessment tool itself. Okay, so the One Needs assessment is accessed through your OHID account. You should, when you log into your account, you should see a tile, that's what these boxes are called, that says the One Needs assessment. As you can see on my screen, I have favorited the One Needs assessment so that we can, so it's easy for me to access. You may not see this, and this is one of those next steps for you. If when you log into the system, you do not see a tile that says One Needs assessment, you are going to need to request access from your OEDS administrator. So if you are, if you have not bookmarked or favorited pieces, you will find them under sites and applications. Because I work for the department, mine looks a little bit different, but you should be able to go in and pull up your site application and be able to find the One Needs assessment. If you don't, you will need to reach out to your OEDS administrator and ask for one of two accesses. Either data entry decision framework. That access will allow you to go in, modify, change, and look at the entire One Needs assessment. This is someone who you want to be making the changes and making adjustments. If you've got someone who you want to just be able to see it, so maybe you've got leadership team and you want the leadership team to be looking at the whole thing in the system, then you want to give that person reviewer decision framework. What that means is they can only go in and read. They cannot make changes. Once you've gotten this access, log out of your OHID account, give it a few minutes, log back in, and you should see that tile on your screen. Now, when you're thinking about who should have access, you want to think about the team who's going to be doing the work. Here is the nice part. This role will not allow anyone to go in and make changes to any funding part of the application. So if you're worried about, if I give somebody access, they can go in and change other things, this role will only allow them access into that One Needs assessment. So you will not need to worry about them getting into other parts of the CCIP, because this actually is not part of the CCIP. The other piece too is thinking about who do you want as part of your team as you are completing this One Needs assessment. So I'm going to use a school district example because I know this happens in school districts, but it may not be as prevalent with our ESCs and our DDs, is sometimes there is a person in June sitting in their office doing the needs assessment all by themselves, and they're writing the plan all by themselves. We really want this to be a team approach. We want you to be able to pull together a team from across your organization to talk about, here's what we need. Let's look at our data and get multiple perspectives for this work. So you may want to include that reviewer decision framework access a little more freely so that other people can go in and see your decision, your One Needs assessment. The reason that these titles don't match, so it doesn't say data entry, One Needs assessment, is in order to make life a little easier for those who've already had to do this. We did not, a district or an organization didn't have to go back in and reassign someone to the One Needs assessment if they had the decision framework access before. So we're trying to make this a little easier in the transition. We will at some point probably update the role to recognize it to be the one needs assessment. So, any questions about getting into the system? Okay. So, let's talk about what you'll see when you get into the system. So when you get into the system, you will land on a landing page. This landing page will give you information about where you are in the process. So when I look here on the screen, you're going to see that I have, here's the surveys that we have. Surveys are needs assessments. That's what the system calls them. And it tells me how many is started, how many is not started, and gives me progress. Yours will look very different on this front page because your dashboard will only be for your organization. I have access to the whole state. So as you can see, I can see a lot more organizations. So yours will look a little bit different. But the key purpose of this landing page here is to give you some high overview information and then give you the option to click on the one needs assessment. So this is where you're going to go in so you can actually open up the one needs assessment. When you go in, so there's a few steps in here, and this is partially because you are representing one organization, where some of our users represent multiple organizations. So when you log into the one needs assessment, you're going to see a page in which you can do a search. In reality, you just want to click search because you're only going to be able to see the organization that you represent. So for some of you, you might actually have access to more than one organization. If that is the case, you may see back where it says one needs assessment. I'm going to go back a screen. Give me just a second. You might see here on the left-hand side where it says, for me, I am Ohio Department of Education. I'm an admin. I have that role. For you, if you've got access to more than one IRN, you would see that you have to select which program you want to look at. So maybe you're the treasurer for two different programs. You would have to select your program here. So when you go to the next page, when you click search, you're only going to see the program in which you've selected. Unfortunately, there's no way to group organizations together unless they're in a hierarchy. So for some of you, you may also work for a school district. You might see that as well. That when you go into the school district, you might see school and all their buildings. So it looks a little bit different just because you only have one organization that you're looking at. So when you do your search, I picked the first one alphabetically on the list. I searched for Adams County Board of DD, and you will see here that it then gives you the only entity listed, which is the Board of DD. To access the system, you just click on your name. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Trying to make this kind of a user-friendly piece. You will also see that many of the options you have here are also options that you will now have in the compliance tool. So if you are part of the monitoring that happens out of the department, you will see that this looks very familiar to the old monitoring and the new monitoring that's coming out. And that is because they run on the same platform. So if it works in monitoring, it most likely will work here and vice versa. So the first time that you open your needs assessment, so when I clicked on Adams County Board of DD here, you will see on that right-hand side, it says not started, which means they have not actually opened up their tool. Until you open your tool, it is not started. So if I click on Adams County Board of DD, this is what I'm going to see. I cannot see anything until you actually hit start. And you as the ESC and you as the DD, you are the one who has the access to start this. You do not need someone from the department or someone from the state support team to open this for you. You have all control to open up your needs assessment. The reason for that is what happens when you click start, and this happens in like seconds, fractions of seconds, is the system is taking your IRN and running it through a series of questions. And it's asking for every question that we have available, should you get the question, so does this question belong to your organization? Then if you do deserve this question, if this question belongs to you, should it be required, recommended, or optional? Now, like I said earlier, because of the new nature of our ESC and DD questions, we did not make any of the questions required or recommended. So everything's optional, but that is what is happening in the background. It's running that based on who you are. So when it runs your IRN, it says, oh, this is an ESC. It automatically is only going to load ESC questions, just like the DD. Here is the DD questions. You will not see school district, community schools, or school building questions in your tool. So you're going to click the start survey, and you only have to do that once. So once someone has done this, you will not have to redo this again until you do your next needs assessment. So I am super happy that there was an ESC who actually had theirs already started. So I was able to go in and actually pull screenshots specifically from one of your organizations. So this is what the screen looks like once you start your survey. One of the first things you're going to see is at the top, there's two tabs. Tab 1 is the needs assessment and tab 2 is the priority needs. So right here, we're in the needs assessment, so it's red. When we click on the priority needs, you're going to see that it's pulling together additional data. Remember how I talked about earlier that we had 8 sections that we tried to run all of our questions and our subsections, our priority needs through? You will see that available to an ESC, there are 8 sections. You will also see those sections listed on the side and at the top. So we've got them in both places. So as you move along, everything looks so much alike that we wanted to make sure we put headers wherever possible so that you would see this is where you're at in the process. The questions can be done in any order you'd like to do them, in any section order that you'd like to do them. So if you'd like to do college and career readiness first, then community family engagement, that's great. But if you want to jump around and you want to do a question here and do a question there, it's completely up to you, and the system is built to accept it that way. What I can say is that the sections were alphabetical. So there is no special organization to the sections. For the questions, we did try to build them one on top of another. So it might be easier to do those top to bottom, but does not have to be. There's only one portion that you have to do in order, and I'll talk to you about that in just a minute. Okay. Jack, you have a great question. So Jack put in the chat box, do all questions in the 8 sections need to be completed? No. You do not have to do all the questions, and you don't have to do all the sections. For some of you, you may find that the section is irrelevant. And that means that you may not, and I'm going to use the early childhood example again, you do not do work with early childhood. So it would be irrelevant for you to consider doing those questions. There's no requirement for it. You don't get funding for that. There's no reason to think about it. But I'm going to throw a little wrench into that thinking here. When you think about what you're doing. And let's say you don't serve early childhood students, but you're like, maybe we should, maybe there's a need that we just haven't addressed yet. That might be a good time to do some of these questions to see, is there a need? Is there something that we should be doing to support and help our community, our students, our other districts? Depending on what you do, it might be relevant to go in and say, you know what, we might want to look at these questions, even though we don't do this work yet. Maybe it's something we should be doing or work we should be offering. So there is not a requirement to answer any of the questions. And I'm putting a little asterisk here because I'm going to come back to that and say, well, there is a little requirement. But any particular question, my advice, at minimum, if you do nothing else, make sure you've done the questions aligned to funding and the work that you're doing. And I'll explain that in a little bit. But no, you have, as an ESC and as a DD, you have 0 questions that are absolutely required for your agency or for based off your data. That is current practice. We will see what this looks like as we continue to get feedback. We may have to put in some triggers because we recognize there are some things that you have to do based on funding, that it would be easy to be able to say, hey, you all receive these funds. Let's make sure these questions are answered. But right now, everything is completely optional. Great question. So when we're thinking about the questions are all grouped into a subsection. You will see that you have a limited number of questions. If you take a look at the district, you'll see that the district could answer well over 100 questions. You do not have that number of needs assessment questions available to you. You will see that you have quite a few less than that. But what we've tried to do is we've tried to group them by section, by subsection. So in college and career readiness, you will see that district college and career readiness is a question group. We call those priority needs. This is to kind of help make things a little more manageable when you have multiple subsections and multiple questions. I am going to apologize now. There's one thing we haven't been able to figure out how to make it better. And if you're looking at the screen, you will see that the question numbers for college and career readiness are 6, 7, and 8. The first thing you're going to go is, Andrea, where's 1 through 5? We have, in order to make life easier for you to talk to each other, we have made sure that we have consistent numbers of questions across all entities. So, and I'm going to look at a name on my screen. Belinda calls me and says, Andrea, I have a question about college and career readiness number 7. College and career readiness in the district college and career readiness section is always number 7. Because this is multiple organizations using the same tool, 1 through 5 might belong to a DD, or 1 through 5 might belong to a school district. So what we've done is we've made it easier and simpler to be able to talk across agencies or organizations, but that does sometimes cause confusion because you're looking for it to start with number 1. So I'm just giving you kind of a heads up. We do have some tools, and I'm going to show you about some of the tools we have on our website that can help you with this. But that is why you see a break in numbers. Those are questions that are not applicable to your organization. You will also see, sorry, let me pop it down here. You'll also see on this right-hand side under the next section button, this required and recommended. I'm telling you about this just because when you see it, you're going to be like, what does this mean? Remember, you don't have required or recommended, but if you are working with a school district, you'll know that they do have required and recommended. And just wanted to give you a hint, like that's why that's there. Just again, reiterate, you do not have any required or recommended questions. This piece over here, you're going to see there is little boxes and they're circled, and they're currently in my picture, they're kind of like a blue-gray color. You also see that same look next to 6, the number 6, 7, and 8 right there on the page as well. That circle and that gray color, part of the piece that as we're building this, we wanted to have some visual pieces to help you see we've done parts of it. So as you go and you start to answer questions, you will start to see that they will turn green. Green does not mean you're finished. Green does not mean that you are completed. Green means you typed something in the box. And when you see it in the sections piece, green means you typed something in one question in that section. Because you have no required or recommended questions, yours are going to turn green real fast because you've done something. If you had a required question, it would make sure that you'd actually put something in that required question box before it would turn green. So please be aware that that might confuse people, or that you might have to actually open up the section to see, oh, in college and career readiness, it's green, but we only answered question 6. We still need to do 7 and 8. But across the top as well, those number of the question, they also turn green as you are going and typing things in. So those are kind of the way the system is laid out. We're hoping that it is pretty user friendly, but and I'm gonna plug this multiple times during the session. If there is something or an idea that you have that would make this easier for you, please, please, please feel free to reach out and let us know as you're working through this process. The other piece that we've talked to different organizations about is when you're thinking about this, it might be a good idea before you pull everybody together to go through and take a look at the questions and make sure you have the right people at the table. So we were talking to a very large school district, and in that conversation with the district, they got to the fiscal questions and they're like, well, we'll just, they're giving it to the fiscal office. You do this. And that is one way to do it. However, that's not a team approach. So we talked about, well, maybe the fiscal office comes in with the answers because nobody else knows them, but then they have to discuss the answers with the team to talk about it. Because one of the things I hear more often, especially from school districts, is that the red tape of their own systems keeps them from being able to do stuff. So if we're sitting in the meeting and I don't know why we do some of the fiscal things that we do, if the fiscal person is explaining to me like, oh, this is why we do this, I'm like, oh, okay. There's the ability to have a conversation to talk about, do we need to change the process? Can we change the process? What might be a better process? Or, hey, Andre, you've got to change your thinking because this has to be the process that we use. So just some of that to think about as you're looking at the questions and you're coming up with your strategy on how you want to approach completing the one needs assessment. Okay, I'm going to do a pulse check. How are we feeling so far? Okay, good. Very good. All right, so let's move on to the next little piece here. Okay, one of the things you're going to see, and this is one of those things where I'm super glad we've got it, but it can be a little unnerving. So we have the ability now, and you're going to look all over for it, for a save button. We want to save, we want to save, we want to save. We like to save. There is no longer a save button, meaning you are answering a question As soon as you type outside the box, so you click outside the box, you go from box 1 to box 2, you're going to see this little answer come up and says your answer is saved. So when I went in, I typed in question 1, I typed in part 2 of question 1 on here, and then in 3, I typed in the word test in question 2. This pops up every time I leave the box in which I'm typing. Here's the good part about that. The good part is you're going to continue to save even when you forget. And this is very typical of me. I'm working on something. I don't realize that I'm, on that 30-minute timer that is going while you're doing this work. And the phone rings, you take the call, you come back to it, and the 30 minutes has expired and it didn't save. Because you didn't hit the save button. Now, when I get that call, if I can remember to click outside that box, I am guaranteed that that's saved. So when I come back in, I have to log in. I have to log back in again, but when I log back in, what I've typed is saved. So we have that option of automatically saving. Here's the problem with that. Let's say you type something in there, you loved what you did, you started working in another section, you come back and you accidentally delete it. I can't retrieve it for you because you're not making that choice to save. You click off that box, it's going to save. So one of the pieces of advice that we have talked about with others is at the end of the day, and you've done a good, long, hard work, and you think, hey, we're pretty good, you might want to download a PDF of your work just to keep it as a record. So if you go in and, like me, sometimes you didn't mean to copy and paste and you copied and pasted the wrong thing, it's still there. So that is a benefit of having automatic save, but it's also a curse if you make a change and it doesn't quite, it wasn't quite intended. On this screen as well, you'll see up at the top where those colors have changed. So that number 1 and number 2 has changed to green. And I'll tell you now, you're seeing a question that is not an ESC or DD's question, and that's because we don't have any examples yet. You guys have not gone in and started working in it, so I was not able to actually pull a specific question, but I thought it would be okay just because we're showing you here that it is going to save automatically for your work. Back just a second. I'm going to hop back a slide real quick. You will see save only in one place, and I apologize, I'm going to have to go the other way because it's not there. Okay. Remember how I showed earlier we had the 6, 7, and 8, and that was the questions that we have? The last question in every subsection or in every priority need, so remember we were talking about district, college, and career readiness. The last question in that group is always going to be, pardon me, sorry about that. The last question is always going to be a root cause question. So you're going to see here, and it's in the top of my screen here, this question. It's the same root cause question for everybody. So it's the same one for a district, it's the same one for ESC, it's the same one for a DD, but this is always the last question. So the last question is, what is the root cause? So what this is trying to do is to get to the underlying issue that, if changed, should have a positive impact on whatever we're working to improve. Once you answer this question, you will have a new question appear. So this is currently on my screenshot. It looks like it's question 5. Once I type into that, you will see that question 6 appeared. So on our example, it says 6, 7, and 8. A question 9 would appear. And this question 9 is this a priority need? Now, If you had ever done the decision framework, you would know that you never wanted to add a yes here because it sent you down and you would then proceed to have to answer all these questions and do all this extra work because you put a yes here. So unless you were sure, you did not want to put a yes here. We want you to no longer think like that. So if you've done the decision framework, block it all out of your mind. If you haven't, great, because you don't have to forget it. What you want to do here is you want to say, is this something we should be doing? Is this something we should be working on resolving, repairing, improving, continuing to grow? Is this something we should be doing? If the answer is yes, click yes. If the answer is no, click no. Here's what I can say. You're going to have to click yes to at least one, because what happens after you click yes? Yes is saying, here is a list of everything we want to think about. You have gotten all the way through your needs assessment. You have gone through and you've looked at every question. You've answered some priority needs and said yes to a couple. You end up in a page that looks a little bit like this. And the reason I'm showing you a school district's version is, again, I don't have an ESC or DD's example to show yet. I can't wait till later in the school year when we do see an ESC or DD work through this process, because then we can use some screenshots specifically from your organizations. So it's a demo site that I'm using to show you this. You will see that I have gone to the save button in the very top, and I'm changing it from in progress to complete. So you'll see that as soon as you open the document, I mean, you start your survey, that status will be started. Once you start working in it, it will change to in progress. When you're finished, you go up there into in progress and you click on completed. So you'll move down, you'll click complete, and that's where you see your save box. That's the only time you'll see save, is when you're ready to complete. Now, if you were a school district or a school building, what happens at that time is that the system is going through and looking at every question you've been assigned and saying, is this required and did you answer it? Is this required? Did you answer it? And if all of those verifications come back as a yes, it saves it. If one of those come back as a no, you get an error message. The nice part is the error message is going to tell you exactly where the problem is. Now, I'm showing you this because as we continue to think about making some questions required with future needs assessments, this would come into play. Right now, you could go in, answer one question, try to save it, and it's not going to give you this error message, because remember, it's going through saying, where's your required questions? It's saying you have none. Are there any that are not answered? Well, I have none, not answered. We're good. And it's going to move you on. Now, the system will let you move on, but you will have troubles doing the next part if you don't resolve the fact that you need to have some priority needs. So that yes, no question, you need to answer at least a couple with yes. And here's why. Oh, sorry. Skip ahead a little bit here. All right. Now, if you'll notice, I have now jumped from the needs assessment over to that priority needs tab. If I have said in that priority needs tab, if I change it to complete like we just did, it will generate information onto this tab. What it is doing, it is looking for all those times you said yes, and it is bringing over the improvement area, so that section that we talked about, one of those 8, the priority need or that grouping, that subsection we talked about, and the root cause you gave. And this is a example site, because again, we don't have ESCs completing it yet. But what you'll see here is that you've got all of this information that you already did. So by clicking yes, all you're saying is, we want it to come over to this page, and it's going to bring the root cause with it. From here, you're going to see that if you clicked 10 or you click 2, it is not additional work. What this is doing is, this is now more comprehensive. If you say, you know what, we need to work on, we've got an early childhood program, we need to work on early childhood, it's going to bring that root cause over, and then you get to make a decision. This is trying to help you go from everything possible to those things that are things you need to work on. So it's kind of narrowing it down a little bit. The next step, the step we're going to talk about next, is going to narrow it down to what are you actually going to work on. Okay. So on this page and on your screen, you will see that it brought over those first 3 pieces. It does not bring over the additional improvement areas. So when we think about that, you're providing services, and I'm gonna go to a different one. Let's say you are a DD and you're working on ensuring your students are graduating. So you're talking about tracking students' progress. You're talking about programs and pathways that you provide to students. So you're thinking about that. Even though those student scores may go back to their home schools, you're thinking about how can you improve that work for your students. So when I think about that and I get into my root cause, and part of my root cause might be around professional development. Part of my root cause might be around operations. It might be around community and family engagement. So there might be different components that I want to look at. What this additional improvement area does is it says, okay, to meet the needs of professional learning, I'm going to identify professional capital. So while I'm working on graduation, that's my biggest need, is to improve my graduation and work at graduation. It's saying professional development has an impact on that. This is saying family and community engagement has an impact on that. So the need is that priority piece. That improvement area is what is those components that need to support it. Okay. The more priority needs, the more extensive planning needed. So I'm going to read out Jack's question. Jack's question is, the more priority needs, the more extended planning. Is there ODE judgment on how many priority needs are identified? So on this page, no, there is no judgment on ODE's piece. We have seen some of our school districts who only bring over 1 or 2 because they're the only ones they want to take to the planning tool, to the CCIP. We've seen others who have truly identified the pieces. If you picked 15 items and you brought them over here, there is not actually any more work that you have to do because you have 15 and I have 2. What you're doing is you only need to do this additional improvement areas if you want to send it to the CCIP. So I'm going to show you right here. There's this nice little box on the side that says send to CCIP. So if you look at our example, they brought over early warning system, English language arts, mathematics, shared leadership, educator equity, and educator recruitment and hiring. Remember, these are made up ones for an example. But if you look at the improvement areas, they didn't include any additional improvement areas for 4 of them. They only included it for English language arts and mathematics, because if you look over, you'll see those are the only 2 they're going to send to the CCIP. So this is why I say you have to have at least a couple that you bring over, because you want to send something to the CCIP to build your plan. We have seen districts who pick 11 that they want to send to the CCIP. We think that's a little too much. because it's hard to be able to spread yourself that thin. Recommendation is about 3 to 5 priority needs. However, if you have 2 and they're exactly what you need to work on and they're extensive, then that's okay. Make sure though that if you are receiving funding, that you've at least covered that in that work. So here's an example that we use with some of our districts. And I apologize, I don't know that I have a good ESC or DD example for this one. But let's say I need to work on literacy. Like literacy is a concern and I need to work on literacy. Great. However, by funding, because I receive federal funds, I have to have a PD plan. I have to address graduation. I have to address equity. So these are things I have to do because I'm getting federal funds and my focus is on literacy. So I could have a literacy goal, a literacy priority need, and embed professional development and all those required pieces into that one priority need. Or I could break it apart and say, I want one on professional development, I want one on literacy, and have them separate and build them out. This is where that additional priority need matters to you more than me. So when I'm thinking about it, I could put professional development under human capital because I'm working on growing my teachers. But maybe that professional development is actually going to be focused on my principals because I need them to lead the work. I could put that under shared leadership. So it's less important on getting the right additional improvement area than it is for it to make sense to you. Because it's not about the department going in and saying, well, I wouldn't put this under professional development, or I wouldn't put this under professional capital. That's not the point. The point is, this is the plan, and this is where you believe it falls into that work. Now, some things would be completely not aligned, but it's more about making sure you have a comprehensive plan. And if you call it under professional capital and I call it under shared leadership, does not matter. That's okay. The other piece, and this is probably a great time to bring this up, this is not about giving the department the answer you think we want. The answer we want to not only the questions within the needs assessment and the root cause and the additional improvement areas, it is not about giving the department the right answer. It is about giving them the answer that is your answer, your truth, your reality. For some of you, you have been doing deep dives into root cause. And so when you look at your root cause, you've done 5 whys, you have done a fishbone activity, and you've gotten down to a really deep root cause. For others, you may not be there yet. And that's okay. You are answering these questions based on what is your information, what is your knowledge, what is your work. So it is not about getting the right answer. It's about getting the real answer. What is your work and pieces? Okay. If the ESC receives the federal funds transferred from our districts via consortium, does the ESC district or both need to address it in the one needs assessment? Belinda, I'm going to give you what I think is the right answer, but I may have to do some digging. Right now, it is who receives the funds from the department or directly from the U.S. Department of Ed. So if I am the fiscal agent and those funds come into me, then I would be the one accounting for that and working with that. But I would also say, if you receive a lot of funds that are flow through funds, so they are district funds that you then get, it is okay to include that into your needs assessment and as part of your work, because that's going to be part of your one plan. That's going to be part of the work you're doing. But I do know the person who receives the funds is the one who for sure needs to make sure that it is accounted for within their system. Belinda, does that help? Okay, great. Any other questions while we've paused for just a minute? You guys, we are flying faster through this. I'm wondering if I'm talking too fast or if you guys are just real quiet. You've got just a few questions. The questions I've got are great though. Okay. Okay, beautiful. All right. So you have gone through and you have completed, you've gone through and you've completed your root cause. You have gone through and you've identified what you want to send to the CCIP. You are then going to again do that save button. Remember, that save button is only used when you're changing your statuses. It's not saved when you actually add text. So you're going to go up to that completion status and you're going to click on that and you're going to click send to planning tool. I'm going to give you guys a little warning right now. The planning tool is not open and it is not supposed to open until February. You're going to see that a little bit later on in the slide. So if you get to this point and you're ready, let's say the end of the week, you're like, we got this. We had a team working on this. You get to this point, you try to hit send to planning tool and it's not going to save. It's not going to go somewhere. We've been told that the validation currently exists. If for whatever reason, and because you guys are new to the process, your ESCs and DDs are new, you are able to hit send to planning tool and you do that before it opens, you're going to have to go back and do it again once the planning tool actually opens, and that is to open in February. I think most of you will not be ready to send a planning tool by the end of the week, but you will be able to send that to the planning tool once we get through the opening piece. So the other piece, and this is very unique, both from the perspective of the decision framework, if you did that one, or the CCIP one needs assessment, is that you have the ability to go back and make modifications and changes whenever you need. So let's say you do this, you send it to the planning tool and you start putting in your plan, you start building your plan out and you realize, oh no, I forgot we really needed something around early childhood. I've used that one a lot today. You can go back in here and click where it says completion status. You can put it back into progress and make changes on this page. You can actually even go all the way back to the needs assessment and go work there by putting it back into progress. So where it says completed, you put it back into progress and it'll let you make changes there. Then you hit completed, it'll update this page. You hit, then once you're finished here, you can send a planning tool and it will also update in your planning tool. So unlike in the past where you've not been able to have the ability to jump back and forth, with this tool, you now have the ability to do just that. And you have the ability, you don't need someone from the department or any other agency to come in and do that for you. I'm getting a couple of questions in the chat box. One of them I'm going to put off. I'm going to put the deadline off because that's actually at the very end of the presentation. So I'll get to that one for sure. Vicki, you asked about, how does this apply to fiscal agents for SSTs? So currently the One Needs assessment is very much connected directly to the consolidated application, and SST funding flows differently. It does not go through the consolidated application. So that piece is not connected yet. However, as you are thinking about building a one plan, we would love to hear how you think that might be able to be connected. because we want you to have one plan for all of your fiscal work. So Vicki, I hope that helps. Okay. So what's next? So you guys have done a great job. You've worked through your one needs assessment. You've been working through that. The next thing that comes is the one plan. Now I want to talk about the cohort. So we are getting right into the question about the deadline for completion. So in 2021, we called that our pilot year. This was the pilot year. However, and unfortunately, it was not the pilot year for ESCs and DDs, like I talked about earlier. We are now in FY 21-22. This is cohort 1. So some of you who are here today know you're identified as cohort 1. Others, you know you're in 2 or 3. However, each one of you should know that you're either cohort 1, 2, or 3. If you're here and you don't know what cohort you're in, if you go into the CCIP and you click in your planning tool, you will see under your name cohort 1, 2, or 3. If you do not see that, please reach out to your federal programs representative, the person you work with, that consultant, and ask them what cohort you're in. Because if you don't see that, either you are not assigned to a cohort or your cohort information is not available in the tool, and we need to update that. So please reach out to your federal programs consultant if you do not see your cohort. So cohort 1 right now is working on their needs assessment and their, oh, before I get there, yes, I can give you the directions again for finding your cohort information. So if you go into the CCIP, log in, and you go into the planning tool, when you click on planning tool, you should see your organization's name at the top, and underneath that, you should see cohort 1, cohort 2, or cohort 3. And what we can do at the end of this, if you'd like me to show you that, I can actually open up my CCIP and show you exactly where that's at. So we'll just make a little note here real quick. And at the end, I'll pull that up so I can share my screen with you. Okay, so the pilot groups. So we have cohort 1 right now. Cohort 1 right now is doing their one needs assessment and their one plan. They have a different deadline than cohorts 2 and 3 because cohort 1 will be going through, I'm so sorry. Hold on just a second. Sorry about that. I think anyone working from home has had a webinar or something interrupted by something. So FedEx is here if anyone would like to know. Okay, so cohort 1 is, oh, perfect. Thanks, Michelle. So cohort 1 will be working on theirs. Cohort 1 is going through a review process, so they actually have an earlier deadline. But the nice part about that is cohort 1 will then use theirs for 3 years. So if you're in cohort 1, you're going to do the needs assessment this year. You will not do it again until FY 24-25. If you're in cohort 2, you're going to do the needs assessment this year. You will do it again this same time next year, and that will get you then into the 3-year process, which will then make you over to the FY 25-26. So if you'll see, like, it's a 3-year cycle. So if you are in cohort 3, You will do the needs assessment this year, next year, and then the third year, and then that'll be good for 3 years, and you'll be on that 3-year cycle of doing your needs assessment and plan. Remember, you may be in a 3-year cycle, but if anything happens or changes or things aren't working out right, you have the ability to go in and make changes. Let's say you take on a new project or you receive some additional funding. You may need to go back in and make modifications to your needs assessment so that you can then make some adjustments to your plan as well, because things have changed. The biggest thing, like we've talked about with school districts, is you might have a huge change in student population. So let's say I'm a school building and a new apartment complex opens up by my school and I see a huge change in my student demographics, or a large influx of students. Brand new school building's been opened up and all of a sudden we now have 200 kids we weren't planning for. That's a time when you go back in and you're like, we're going to go back and do our needs assessment again, or we're going to look at it. Even though it's not part of that 3-year cycle, you have the ability to go back in and make changes. So we actually see some of our cohort, our pilot group going back now saying, oh, we've got some big changes, because many of them were completing their needs assessment prior to school building closure. So if you're cohort 1, you'll do it this year. You will not do it again for 3 years. Cohort 2, you do it this year and next year, and then you won't do it for 3 years. Cohort 3, you're going to do it this year, next year, and the following year, and then that'll be your 3-year cycle. Questions about the cohort, process? Okay, Belinda, you're asking, can we do ours this year anyway if you're cohort 2? So everybody who receives consolidated application funding has to do the needs assessment this year. The piece is you're going to have to do it again next year. Now, for some of you, this might be a good year to try, especially if you're in cohort 2. This might be a really good year to try out a process for answering questions, because you get to redo it again next year. So it's an opportunity, like, we're going to try this out, or we're going to try these questions out. We're going to try it again, because what you're going to see is that we'll be updating the questions for next year. So it's an opportunity for you to try things out. You can also do it in the mindset of thinking about, you know what, we're going to do it again next year, but let's plan out. Let's be strategic. Let's think about our 3-year plan, our 5-year plan, because many of you already have a strategic plan that maybe is 5 years. So you can think about it that way, but just know you are going to have to redo your needs assessment and your plan until your cohort year happens. So what I told the pilots is it was great to be a pilot, because you're the first one out of the gate, but you also have to live through some of our mistakes and our problems as we all grow and learn. The problem with being 3 is you had to wait so long to grow and learn with us, that you do have to do it multiple times until you get into your cohort. So I do apologize for that. But what we are doing, and if you're wondering how you got into your cohort, it is actually a random process. We did divide up organizations across the years. So we did not have, for an example, our largest entities, we didn't have them all in the same year because we had multiple plans to review. So we did divide up our ESCs and our DDs across the 3 cohorts. And we did that randomly for our ESCs and our DDs. Any additional questions about the cohorts? Give you a little information about what it means to be in a cohort, other than you are in a 3-year process. So we are doing a 3-year process. We are also connecting with other offices. So in the past, your CCIP plan, for many of you, may have been only read by federal programs. For our DDs, yours might have been read by ESCs, by the Office of Exceptional Children and by federal programs. But for the most part, offices across the agency weren't looking at your plan. So what we have actually created is a review process to look at plans to make sure they are compliant and quality. Because we want to be able to be supportive and helpful and make sure, yes, you've met all the requirements to serve the students that you're serving and for the funding you're receiving, and to be able to provide some support when possible. So in the actual CCIP, in the planning component, you will actually see a tab that now says ODE Plan Review Status. What this is, it's an opportunity for each of the offices, and this is actually a screenshot of a list of all the offices that could look at a plan. But we'll be looking at plans, and we do as a team. So I'm gonna use the Office for Improvement and Innovation. I apologize, that's the office I came to prior to the Office of Exceptional Children. They may not look at your plan because their focus is on those schools and districts identified through federal funds, meaning priority and focus schools and our intensive districts. Whereas the Office of Exceptional Children, if you're receiving funds to serve students with disabilities, you might be considered for review by the Office of Exceptional Children. If you're receiving early childhood funds, the Office of Early Learning and School Readiness might wish to look at your program. Just like if you're receiving federal funds for serving English learners or state funds, you might get chosen by those offices. They are working on, the One Plan subcommittee is working on a guidance document that will be shared with all cohort 1 members that actually will walk you through what is being looked for in plans. So an example, one of the things looked for in Office for Exceptional Children is, are you identifying and serving students with disabilities? So we want to be able to see that in your plan. So this is part of that review as well. So one of the things I can say is if you're in cohort 1, you may see a little bit of a delay in responses for approving your plan. Funding is different from the plan, so don't get confused on that piece. We'll go back and talk about that again. But the plan itself is being reviewed and looked at by multiple offices. So if you look at my example here, you will see, this is actually Ashtabula City. Plan meets criteria, recommended suggestions, plan needs to address criteria, plan not reviewed, plan review in process. There are different statuses, but you also can see, if you look down below, plan not reviewed. These were all of the offices across the agency that did not review that particular district's plan. I cannot tell you who will be looking at your plan. What I can say is, if you're in cohort 1, you could be reviewed by not only federal programs, but other offices across the agency. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Okay, so let's talk about some timelines. If you are a member of cohort 1, and I believe this information, if it did not already go out in a CCIP note, it will be going out very soon. So this is new, this is an update. If you're in cohort 1, your needs assessment is due September 30th. If you'd received previous communications, you would know that was March 30th. We did extend it out another month due to all the things that are happening currently and trying to give some flexibility to the district. So If you're in cohort 1, your needs assessment and plan are due at the same time, which will be April 30th. If you've not received communications, you will receive that from the Office of Federal Programs, which will give you that date. But know if you're cohort 1, you are due earlier than cohorts 2 and 3. The office review team will start reviewing May 1st. So if you submit yours on April 30th, they will start reviewing May 1st. And they have through June to get that reviewed and commented, approved, those recommends, all those things, they've got until sometime in June to get that information back to you. Some plans are much faster. Some plans will start review in May. They'll be done the first week of May. And that's because there's only one office looking at your plan. And therefore, we don't need to worry about the other offices all getting it taken care of and reviewed. Because if I'm looking at 15 plans, yours might be my last one to look at, but my colleague in federal programs, you might be the first. So you might see those start to trickle in as you look at your system. But we've been given kind of the deadline of getting things in by June. Everyone's consolidated application, if you want funding to roll by July 1, you need to make sure you get that in by July 1 to have that substantially approved date. That's everybody. So if you are in cohorts 2 and 3, your one plan and one needs assessment have the same deadline as your consolidated application. So if you are in cohort 1, you're going to have your one needs assessment and one plan due the end of April, and your funding application due July 1 or June 30th, which gives you a little bit of wiggle room. If you're in cohort 2, you can submit your needs assessment and your plan at any point, but you have to have them submitted prior to submitting your consolidated application. So if you submit your consolidated application on the 30th, you need to make sure that your one plan and your one needs assessment are also in by June 30th. Does the timeline make sense? Okay. I believe this is the fastest I've ever walked through this presentation. Usually it takes about an hour and a half, and then I always give myself a little more time. So I'm sorry, it usually takes 2 hours. So we're at about an hour and a half. What other questions do you have regarding the one needs assessment? As you're thinking about that, let me talk a little bit about the plan as you put your questions into the chat box. You will be receiving, if you've not already, professional development opportunities around the one plan. The one plan right now, there is not going to be an ESCDD specific training planned because the system for both you and the school districts is nearly identical in the process. So it is most likely that you will be able to join any professional development training for your one plan. If you work with an SST, because you have other processes or work with that, and they have opportunities for you to attend a work session for the one needs assessment or a work session or a training around the one plan, please feel free to reach out and see if that would be applicable to you, because you already are working with them. And it might be nice to have some additional support or resources as you're walking through this. See if that is something that might be good for you. So just ask them if that works for you. Okay, so we do have a question in the chat box. Barb's asking about what is the open date. Open means that that's when it starts. So the one needs assessment, we actually opened it up in December. Open meaning if you logged in, you could see it. The one plan for you, remember I said earlier, don't send it to the planning tool. Don't send it to the planning tool until it opens. You want to make sure that it's open, and this is that open date. So you can actually go in February and look at that. One of the nice pieces is you should receive a CCIP note letting you know the exact date that that one plan opens. I know every conversation I've had with the one plan chair has talked about that opening up around the 1st of February, but I would give it probably till about the 10th, just in case there's some snags in the release date. But you should receive a CCIP note when that opens up. I hope that helps. If not, pop in another question in the chat box and I'll see if I can do a better job on that one. Okay, so if you're in OEDS, the role that you need, Todd, you got it almost perfect. It's data entry, decision framework. And the reason for that is because we are using an old role, and the old needs assessment was called the decision framework. So if you go into OEDS, you should see data entry, decision framework, and reviewer decision framework. Those are the ones you want to look at. Perfect. All right. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop the recording. I want to say thank you to all of you who came. Maybe I'm going to stop the recording. Let's try. Okay.